6 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this planning committee. I'll start by reading out the public notice at the beginning of the agenda. For the purpose of public transparency and accountability, the meeting will be live streamed online. Details of how to access the live stream have been made available on the Council's website. For health and safety reasons and in accordance with our risk assessment, members of the public are asked to follow the meeting via this method and are not allowed to attend any physical meeting in person. Members of the public wishing to speak at the meeting will be able to do so remotely, and details of how to do this have been provided after registrations to speak were received. There's one other point that I have to make, and that is we've been asked to wear masks when we're not speaking, and of course the door is open. So we are taking the precautions which we are recommended to take. So if I can go on to the first item, which is apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence?
Apologies have been received from Councillors Brackstone, Hope and Thackeray. No substitutes have been received.
Chairman, can I just ask about item 7? I think you might have made a comment at this point.
Yes, I apologise, yes. Items, for the benefit of members of the public who may be listening in, there was a great deal of interest in item 7. We have received a lot of correspondence overnight, which has resulted in the need to look at that correspondence in greater detail, and so the recommendation tonight will be to defer that item, and the officers and myself are also hoping that members will also agree to a site meeting. So if there are members of the public who are specifically waiting to hear to hear the discussion on this matter, I just think I ought to let them know before we start that it's unlikely that this matter will actually be discussed this evening. Going on to the next item, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest to make? Councillor Goodrick.
Thank you, Chairman. This is quite long. So agenda item 6, they're all personal, non-prejudicial and non-pecuniary. It should be noted that I'm Chairman of the North Yorkshire Building Control Partnership Board. I'm a member of North Yorkshire County Council and a member of the Malton and Norton Flood Alleviation Group for Rydale District Council. So those are those declarations. And then item 8, again, personal, non-pecuniary and non-prejudicial. I'm a member of the AONB Joint Advisory Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodrick. Are there any other declarations of interest? Thank you.
Chairman, I think we've got 3 apologies tonight. I'm sure if they were...
Yeah, we have had the apologies. We have had the apologies. We go on to the minutes of the last meeting. Will somebody propose them as a correct record, please? Councillor Cleary, seconded. Councillor Potter. Do we all agree? I think we can raise our hands on this one.
I'll abstain, Chair.
Yeah, so that's carried with one extension. The next item is to deal with matters of urgent business. I have 3 items of urgent business. First of all, I'd just like to mention that in regard to this meeting, I didn't think it was appropriate that this meeting should be take place at all. I thought it should be online, and that until it was online, it should be cancelled. However, I've been persuaded that the meeting should go ahead. So I want everybody to be aware of that. The second point, it is Christmas. I would dearly have liked to have offered members a drink of a first class bottle of wine, which I bought for the purpose, but I'm advised that this is not a good idea. So I'm afraid, as this meeting is so close to Christmas, I have to offer you something in the way of festivity. So I've provided a mince pie. They're top quality mince pies from Thomas's in Malton, and I do hope you will eat and enjoy them. And please, if you want to eat them during the meeting, please eat them in the meeting. Don't worry about that. The third item of urgent business is to mention that our Chief Planning Officer is leaving us shortly, and this is his last meeting. And so, some of us have had numerous disagreements with Gary over the last few years, but he's been here an awful long time. He's managed the office, and and I think he ought to have some recognition. So in a moment I'm going to make a presentation to him. But before we actually get there, I'm suggesting that each group has a representative, and if they wish to speak, if they wish to say anything at this stage, please let them say it. I'm not going to impose a 3-minute deadline, but please don't take longer than 3 minutes if you're going to speak. So, would anybody like to speak before I make this presentation? Councillor Potter.
I hope there's no booze in these mince pies. Anyway, unaccustomed as I am to public speaking in planning meetings, see, we might not have always seen eye to eye on planning issues, but Gary has piloted the authority through stormy waters on several huge planning reforms in the last couple of decades, particularly the wholesale disposal of centuries of evolution in national policy about 10 years ago, and regular tinkering ever since. So while many planning authorities inexplicably lurch along in a rudderless fashion without a local plan strategy, our team, with Gary at the helm, has ensured that we are not one of them, and long may that continue. I've already warned Gary about being the prospective owner of a serious amount of free time, which I'm sure several people will be eyeing up with some glee, with a view to committee positions of every description. And I wonder if he's considering election to North Yorkshire Council with a view to chairing the planning committee. I think I know the answer to that one. Whatever, I'd like to wish Gary a long and happy retirement, and I expect a cheery wave, preferably involving all 5 fingers, if he leisurely passes High Mill. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Gary, I'm not nearly as clever as Councillor Potter with whips and quips. So what I'm going to say is this. I wish you all the very best for your retirement, everything that you would wish to have. And to say thank you for all your hard work and dedication over the last 20 years at Ryder. I don't think we would be where we are without you at the helm, and I'm sure you're leaving it in a very safe pair of hands. So good luck, and I wish you all the very best.
Does anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Mason.
Gary, I'll echo what Mike has said and Caroline has said, but for me personally, I've only known you for 3 years, really, as a councillor, but I think your guidance has been really useful for me. We haven't agreed sometimes, but your guidance has been right, I think, most of the time for me, and I appreciate the guidance you give me.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Does anybody else wish to speak? Well, in that case, we'll get on with the presentation. So Councillor Potter has a card, I think, to deliver to Gary. And on behalf of the members of this council, because this hasn't been this hasn't been a collection limited to just this committee, I'd like to give Gary two vouchers for the North Yorkshire Moor Railway, one for a top-class dinner on the Pullman train, and the other for drinks to go with that dinner. So.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm mindful that there's business to be done tonight, but I think thank you for those very, very, very kind words. And I think it's safe to say that it's been an interesting 20 years, or nearly 20 years on occasions, but you are in a safe pair of hands, and I think you all know that. So I think you can look ahead with a degree of confidence that come January in the new year, that Jill Thompson will be leading the team forward for an interesting 15 months, I think. Thank you.
Well, having got that business over, we can't toast Gary, but could we take a bite of a mince pie? Right. Okay. We'll now go on to the next item of business, which is the schedule of items to be determined by the committee. And the first one is the basement, the Cornmill Railway Street, Moulton. Could you introduce this, please, Neve?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If we could just have the aerial map up, please, Haley, that would be great. Thank you. Yes, so the Cornmill is a Grade 2 listed former Cornmill and warehouse, which is situated within the Moulton Conservation Area. As you can see from the map, it's located to the eastern side of Railway Street and adjacent to the River Derwent, which flows to the south. The majority of the property has been converted into flats, which are run by Impact Living. Additional information on the services they provide have been included within the officer report. However, they're a not-for-profit company who provide housing and support services with 34 self-contained apartments already present at the Cornmill. And this application seeks planning permission for the change of use and alteration of the basement of the former mill to form 3 one-bedroom flats, a support facility and stores, together with new entrance gates for vehicular and pedestrian access. And I think it's just important to make some clarifications about the basement title. The application is for a change of use of the lower ground floor to residential dwellings, which is considered to be a more vulnerable use class according to the EA guidance. This has been established as the LPA are interpreting this as not being standard basement development, and such structures would be highly vulnerable. This is notwithstanding the original description of the development, but has been established following the site visit and additional incoming information from the agent. Further advice on this point has been received from Building Control, referenced in the report, and you'll also be able to appreciate this from the site visit photos that I'll run through now to help clarify on the site-specific circumstances. So if we could just go to the first photograph, please. So this is just looking towards the eastern elevation of the Cornmill building, and as I noted, along Railway Street it is at a higher level than the remaining elevations. The next photograph shows the northeastern corner of the site, and you can appreciate the sort of gradual decrease in levels at this point. The next photograph is just a view kind of where the vehicular and pedestrian access gates would be, and that was also noted on the aerial map. The next photograph is actually a front-on view of precisely where the ground floor flats would be in the area that's currently accessed by the two doors. And at this point, you appreciate that it is at the kind of basically level with the external levels at this point. So rather than the basement kind of definition, in our view, this is more akin to a lower ground floor level. The next photograph shows just the kind of fairly level car park at this point, looking south towards the river. And the next photograph is just looking from the kind of southern boundary of the site northwards at the car park. And the flats for conversion would be located to the, you can't really see them from this angle, but the doors that I pointed out before are sort of beyond the two-storey outrigger element there. And I think it might be the final photograph is a view of the southern elevation of the building from the bridge over the River Derwent. And at this point, again, it's just another example of the varying land levels at this point. Pardon? Oh, sorry, there's another photo. Yeah, sorry, this is an internal photo of the site. So you'll note the door there to the left-hand side is the one that you had seen from the photographs before. And there is just a very sort of small, pretty limited ramp that will bring you to level access into the building at that point. And I think there is one more photograph. Yeah, it's just another internal view looking back towards the doors in between the pillars at that point. And I think that is it for photographs. Yep. If we could just go back to the aerial map, that would be great. In terms of the principle, the proposed units for conversion would add 3 units to the existing 34-unit offer within the site. It's considered that the service provided by Impact Living is undoubtedly of great value to the local area. The support offered to young people who may be more vulnerable or who have experienced periods of difficulty in securing safe accommodation is considered to be particularly valuable. This proposal would help to fulfil the need for a specific accommodation type in the district and would address a shortfall in stock. In terms of character, form and impact on the listed building and amenity and highway safety, it's considered that the physical proposals are acceptable. The Council's Building Conservation Officer, the Environmental Health Officers in both housing and the standard environmental health team, and the North Yorkshire Highways Officers have confirmed no objection. So moving on to really what is the critical element of this application and flood risk. A detailed section on flood risk has been included within the officer's report. As noted, the wider site is predominantly located within flood zone 3 according to the EA's flood map for planning, with the proposed flats located in the highest zone. There has been detailed consultation with the statutory consultees in this application, and on the 10th of August 2020, or sorry, I think that date may be incorrect, but the most recent response from the EA has confirmed that they were able to remove their objection subject to the imposition of a stringent condition. This has been included in the officer's report, and amongst other things, it would secure the tanking of the accommodation up to 2.1 AOD. It would also secure the window sills to be set at 19.6 AOD, which is higher than the current levels, and the windows being constructed to be watertight, with the lowest opening part set not lower than 20.1 AOD. There would also be no doors any longer along this eastern elevation serving the flats and the support space. This would mean that in the event of a flood, the proposed construction of the flats should not allow for water ingress based on the modelled figures provided within the FRA, including the 1 in 100 year and the 1 in 200 year defended and undefended levels. Furthermore, as detailed in the report, all future occupiers would have a means of escape internally, as the access to and from the flats would only be onto Railway Street, set at the higher level. As recommended by the EA, North Yorkshire County Council's emergency response team were consulted in respect of this proposal, and they had no specific objections. As detailed in the report, the lead local flood authority have objected and do maintain their objection. This is an in-principle objection based on their view that basement level accommodation in flood zone 3 could never be supportable. However, As identified before, and as you've been able to see from the photos, the site is presently accessed from what is essentially the ground level of the adjoining car park. This proposal has been very carefully considered by officers, and whilst it's not a common situation to approve residential accommodation in Flood Zone 3 or to recommend approval in light of an objection from the LLFA, the site-specific situation in our view is a different context, but I do want to emphasise it's not a decision taken lightly. In considering the EA's response to the site-specific situation, they are satisfied that subject to the proposed construction techniques and mitigation measures that the proposed flats can be safely accommodated. The proposed accommodation, as noted, will meet an important and specific housing need in Rydale for people who may be more vulnerable, and this is given significant weight, together with the physical works that will render the development less likely to be affected by floodwater ingress that can be controlled by planning condition. Furthermore, at Impact Living, there is a coordinated management team who have in place a programme to deal with flood events, which was detailed in the Flood Risk Emergency Response Plan and the Flood Action Matrix, which will be conditioned for annual review. So this is very different to market housing, for instance, where there wouldn't be that level of joint control or joined up thinking. Due to the type of flood events which have been experienced in Malton in the past, flooding is generally anticipated in advance and can be prepared for accordingly. Therefore, whilst persons may be temporarily accommodated elsewhere in the event of a flood risk situation, it's unlikely that there would be significant risk. It's also considered that this meets the sequential test and the exception test as outlined in the report, and the aforementioned stringent conditions will be recommended. Therefore, on balance, subject to those conditions, this is recommended for approval by officers. And just to note, Malton Town Council have recommended approval and there have been no other objections. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Niamh. I believe we have one speaker, Andrew Croxall. Do you wish to speak, Mr. Croxall? Are you there?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, it's just basically to just carry on from Niamh's bit, which is basically obviously the only objection to the proposal is from the lead local flood authority, who consider the proposals are classed as a basement, and they haven't really changed their stance from day one. We are aware of the vulnerability classification and the flood zones designation, and I've confirmed to the case officer that the proposed level of development should be classed as the ground floor or even lower ground floor, as level access to several existing dwellings along these eastern elevation from the courtyard are achieved, i.e. plots 27, 28, 30 and 31. And this also includes the existing access to the proposal site. Although it has been referred to as a basement in the past, as referred to in the previous planning approvals for this part of the floor level and area of the coal mill, this was probably because of part of the story you see now today is below the ground level on the Railway Street side. The basement floor level was in actual fact constructed and built as a normal ground floor and afforded all photographs to the case officer to support our case. Obviously, over the time, the bridge over the River Derwent has been reconstructed to go with the surrounding levels, with the ramp and external stair configuration added later to the western elevation. So the question is, by removing doors on the eastern elevation, there is an improvement in terms of flood risk, but under Part B, it would be viewed as a basement. However, if external doors to individual flats were considered, North Yorkshire Building Control would deem it appropriate to adopt the standards for above ground structure and not a basement. So it's contradictory of terms. The applicant is more than happy to implement the necessary flood mitigation measures that are referred to in the submitted flood risk assessment and has already installed non-return valves within the courtyard area earlier this year. They have also signed up to the Environmental Agency flood warnings with the approved flood evacuation plan and flood action matrix being annually reviewed by the Coal Mill management team. It is considered that the proposal will deliver clear benefits to the housing need in Rydale, in that Impact Living deliver tailored support to address issues such as mental health, learning disabilities, emotional well-being, addiction, personal hygiene, sexual health and diet. The creation of one-bed flats are more economical to eat and easier for people to manage and maintain a tenancy, whilst offering the opportunity to live independently with support staff on site. The supported accommodation is meant to be short to medium-term starter housing that is an immediate stepping stone to moving on to independent living in more mainstream accommodation. When the applicant first started working at the coal mill, the building was run down and there was quite often antisocial behaviour, which involved the police being called. They wanted to create comfortable accommodation where tenants feel safe and supported.
You have 30 seconds.
All of their flats have now finished between tenants and are ready to be lived in with larger items of furniture and appliances included. As well as support staff being on site, they also employ a security team, creating a community which tenants say they feel safe and enjoy living in. They have built up relationships with other professionals and work closely with North Yorkshire Police, Rydale District Council, Adult Social Services, mental health teams and North Yorkshire Horizons, often receiving referrals from the various sectors named above. Over the past 3 years, they've had to decline a lot of applicants due to lack of availability of flats. By having the opportunity to create further flats, this will enable them to help and support more people in the future. Therefore, we are of the same opinion as the case of here that the proposal, subject to the relevant conditions, will be safe for its lifetime, delivering significant economic, social and environmental benefits. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, do members have any questions? Councillor Potter.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I've got a question for Alpha. I see I asked the question, just confirmation at the pre-meeting, that the access to these flats would be via the stairs only. And that's been confirmed by Mr. Croxall on his email on the one of the late pages. So on that basis, and the fact that clearly this application or this development wouldn't have normal building regs regarding access for disabilities, I was interested in having a condition put on that these flats could only be used by people without such disabilities, and I was told that that wasn't really possible. So just for the public record, could I ask Alpha to give the reasons for not having such a condition? Thank you.
Well, the conditions, the rules of this committee don't actually allow us to ask the applicant. The question must be addressed to the planning officer.
No, that's for Alpha, our legal representative.
Beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chairman. I can answer that. So we have 6 tests for conditions to be lawful, one of which is necessity, and the guidance directs us that if a condition would be within the remit of another regulatory regime, then it won't meet the test of necessity. So the kind of condition that's being contemplated about limiting the potential occupants, firstly, risks bringing us within the remit of equality legislation, but is also regulated by existing frameworks. So that's why I wouldn't be recommending that if the committee was minded to approve the application, it contemplated such a condition.
Thank you, Alpha.
Or any other questions? Right. As there's no other questions, we'll move to debate. And I think I'm going to start first on this occasion. I'm very much concerned that that one side of the county council is saying that planning permission shouldn't be granted. We, as local authorities, are constantly accused in newspapers for giving permission on floodplains, and then the results being, and then without surprise, the promises are flooded, and we get into all sorts of bad publicity as a result of that. I'm not at all happy about this. I know that the Environment Agency has agreed, but we know that the Environment Agency tends to be quite happy with building on the floodplain, and I'm not sure that I have all that much confidence in them. I would like there to be a site visit in regard to this, and I would like the lead flood authority to be invited to that site visit, and also the Environment Agency to be invited to that site visit, so we can hear from them personally, and they can point out the things that concern them. And I think that way we'll be in a better position as members to make a rounded decision. I hope somebody will support a site meeting, but I'll leave it to you. Councillor Mason, did you wish to say something?
Yeah, I think I would support a site visit, actually. My only concern is it seems very reliant on the flood action matrix, and I don't know, I feel like I need to see it more, because my memories of that area of Moulton's flooded regularly. So I would support you if you want to propose it.
Yes, I proposed it. Does anybody else wish to speak?
Chairman, I don't want to get involved in the vote. It's just that we can, and obviously members will make a decision whether they wish to see the site or not, and we can invite other organisations to it. I've got no way of guarantee whether either the Environment Agency or the Lead Local Flood Authority will be able to attend. I know from personal experience that the Lead Local Flood Authority are currently missing several staff, so I suspect their ability to attend site visits will be severely compromised. That's not to say you shouldn't have a site visit, and we could invite other organisations if you so wish, but we can't guarantee as officers that other organisations will then be able to attend. All I would say is that, as you'll have seen from the date of this application, this has been very thoroughly gone through with the relevant bodies. And it is fair to say, Chairman, and you are correct, that we have the emergency planning part of the North Yorkshire County Council happy with this, as is the Environment Agency, whereas the Lead Local Flood Authority has maintained its in-principle objection. And you can't get away from the fact that this is in Flood Zone 3, but that is not necessarily an embargo on development. So I wouldn't equate this with building new dwellings on floodplains. This is a change of use of an existing dwelling in a flood zone, and whether or not what's before you is on balance safe to approve. And I think you'll appreciate that officers won't make those recommendations lightly, Chairman. So the recommendation is one of approval, but clearly it's your decision tonight. This is why we brought it to you as a planning committee.
Well, Gary, we've had a full report. We've seen that report, and we know you've spent a long time on it. But I personally think that members, if members wish to see this, and give the lead flood authority an opportunity to attend, if they attend, if they attend, they will obviously consider it important that they should attend. If they don't attend, then we can make a decision without them. But I do think they should have an opportunity to attend. But it is up to members. And I don't think we should just make decisions on the basis that that matter has already been before the officers for a very long time. Does anybody wish to speak? Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I appreciate that you'd like to see a bit more of the site and possibly even talk to other people involved. I would just, before deciding on that vote, just repeat an element of Neve's report that said that refers to your quite correct observation that planning officers or planning committees are regularly criticised for permitting development on flood areas. I believe that the majority of those criticisms are on private housing, which don't, as Neve has said in her report, have the element of control that housing developments of this nature have. And I think we do have the quite detailed reports, elements of that in the report that say how, in the event of flood, how it would be managed. And as I say, as has already been repeated, the agencies involved in flood management have accepted the mitigating elements of this application. So I'll wait and hear what other people say, but I would say that this development is not a greenfield development that doesn't have the element of control, that has the element of control that the private new developments in greenfield areas lack. So thank you for that.
Anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Goodrick.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't lie, I did have some concerns with regard to the flood zone 3 element of this development. It is a change of use rather than a new development. I'm also comforted that there are measures being put in place through building control that we can try and make this these units as relatively flood-proof as is possible. And also, given the flood mitigation work that's gone on by North Yorkshire County Council on the River Derwent, I'm hoping perhaps we won't see the level of flooding that we've seen previously. So it's a really difficult one for me, because part of me is concerned that the 3 households are put into potentially a flood zone 3 area, and they may not have the resilience to stand the flooding if it happened to them. So it's a very finely balanced judgment call, is this. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Goodrick. Councillor Potter.
Yeah. If we are just talking about the whether to have a site visit or not, because I'll have other things to say on this, but I just wanted to point out that this was raised yesterday, and it was suggested that it wouldn't be possible to look at the inside of the building anyway. So on that basis, I'm quite happy with what I've seen of the outside. And if we're not going to see the inside, I'm quite happy to make a decision this evening. Thank you.
A site visit has been proposed and seconded. Can we have a vote, please?
So I'll just read down the list. This is a vote for a site inspection, Chairman. Councillor Andrews.
For.
Councillor Cleary.
For.
Councillor Goodrick.
Against.
Councillor Mason.
For.
Councillor Mackenzie.
For.
Councillor Potter.
Against.
Councillor Windris.
Abstain.
Right, Chairman. I think that's 4 votes for a site inspection and 2 against and 1 abstention. So I think that's a vote to effectively defer decision tonight for a site inspection. That obviously we'll have to arrange in the new year. I would suspect the week commencing the 10th of January, but we would have to agree that at the end of the meeting. Thank you. So that's...
Yes. Well, hopefully we will have another site meeting at the same time. So, well, not at the same time, but on the same day. So it's very inconvenient at this time of year, but I suppose so be it. Can we go on to the next? Can we go on to the next item, please, which is item 7, which is on page 31. The erection of an isolation stable barn for 12 number houses with ancillary areas for tack, feed and garage, associated landscaping, installation of 2.5 metre acoustic fencing to eastern boundary of the site, installation of a section of new hard standing to provide partially separated vehicular access for equestrian traffic, widening of the existing access, amendments to existing parking arrangements, installation of a new vehicular parking space within the main driveway, and retention of a section of existing hard standing, together with temporary retention of temporary stabling and 1 number storage container. Now, we have in front of us some quite extensive correspondence, and the view, I've discussed this with Gary, and the view that the officers and myself are taking is that really this is the things that we have been asked to look at are things that we're not going to be able to deal with tonight, and so therefore the sensible thing would be to defer the matter, and if members would like to have a site meeting, which I would recommend, then we have a site meeting. Now we could go through the formal procedure of an officer's report, followed by representations for members of the public. I would suggest, unless the officers advise me to do otherwise, that if members are happy to defer this item for a site visit, we just leave the matter deferred tonight, and we don't go through that procedure, and we leave it to the next time when it actually does come back for full discussion. Do you wish to say anything, Gary?
Only just really to elaborate a little. Obviously, members will be aware of quite a significant amount of correspondence that's been received over the last 24 hours or so. Some of that sort of cuts to the advice that we've been given in terms of the barrister's opinion, and I think our own solicitor has suggested that in the interest of equity that we should be circulating some of what we received in the last 24 hours to the barrister to see what his view on that is in terms of the advice already given. So I think the logic would suggest that we have to defer making a decision tonight. And I think, notwithstanding whatever that decision, whatever that advice ends up being, we still have to make a decision on a planning application where there is an issue in terms of the relationship of the development to other property outside of the application site. And that deferral does give us the opportunity to consider having a site inspection. And I think that is something that members may wish to consider tonight in this instance, I think.
So if members are happy for us to proceed with this in this way, I will propose that the matter be deferred for a site visit. And if I have a seconder for that, we will just go on to the next item. If members will vote in favour of what I'm suggesting. Councillor Goodrick, are you seconding me?
I am, Chairman, thank you.
Does anybody else wish to speak? Shall we go straight to the vote then, please?
This is a vote for deferral and a committee site inspection, Chairman. Councillor Andrews.
For.
Councillor Goodrick. Sorry, Councillor Cleary, sorry.
For.
Councillor Goodrick.
For.
Councillor Mason.
For.
Councillor Mackenzie.
For.
Councillor Potter.
For.
Councillor Windress.
For.
Well, that's unanimous, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Can we now go on to item number 8, which page is that now? 77, page 77. There's erection of a 2-number detached 3-bedroom dwelling, erection of a detached carport with associated parking and amenity areas following demolition of existing abattoir buildings. And it's application 20-00823, Oblique FUL at Nunnington. Can we have your report, please, Niamh?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If we could just have the aerial map, that would be great, please, Hayley. Lovely, thank you. Yes, so the application site relates to a range of former abattoir buildings, overgrown land to the rear west of these buildings and surrounding paddock land to the south, totaling approximately 0.017 hectares. And this is accessed via Rectory Lane in Nunnington, which you can see just underneath the sign for plot 1 there. The abattoir has been unoccupied since 2016, and this application has been submitted on behalf of Nunnington Estate. The application seeks approval for the erection of 2 3-bedroom dwellings and a detached carport with associated parking and amenity areas. This originally related to the erection of 3 properties, with the 3rd proposed for inclusion within the paddock to the southeast. This was removed following concerns raised by the Building Conservation Officer. Various other amendments have been made to the scheme, and these have been detailed in the reports and re-advertised. And just looking to the aerial map, I would note that objections remain from the occupiers of East Barn and West Barn to the north of the site. and that's in relation to amenity impacts, including shadowing and loss of privacy, together with the development appearing imposing. The parish and all other statutory consultees no longer have any objections to the revised scheme. And on the map there, you should be able to see, the orange dash line indicates the site development limit, the village development limits in Nuneaton. And as I've detailed in the report, plot 2 to the north and the amenity space that would be associated with it falls entirely within the village development limits. It's plot 1, which is highlighted there, where the majority of the site falls outside the development limits. But as you can appreciate, there is a strong connection to the built area of the village at that point. So just moving on to the photographs. The first photograph is taken from Rectory Lane, and it's looking towards Smith Cottage, which is the property on the right-hand side, and then this is the access to the site. And just to the left of the access is the paddock where the third dwelling has since been omitted from the scheme. And the next photograph is a view from Rectory Lane looking southwards towards the site entrance, and that is the property Smith Cottage just in the foreground on the right-hand side, and Rectory Cottage to the southern part there, sort of centrally located. The next photograph is just a more front-on view of that same scene, and within this image you can appreciate the abattoir buildings, which are just located in the background at that point. So the next photograph is looking from that point out onto the access along Rectory Lane, with the paddock that no longer has the third proposed dwelling included. The next photograph is some of the kind of front elements of the abattoir buildings, and you can appreciate these aren't really in a great state of repair at the moment, and as I've said, have been unoccupied since 2016. And obviously there is a very close proximity between them and the surrounding residential dwellings. The next photograph is just another view of that and where the parking occurs for Smith Cottage to the rear. The next photograph is actually the western side of the abattoir buildings, which opens out onto the sort of grass rear element, which is all within development limits. And the next photograph is taken from standing beside that western elevation of the building, and in the background there you can see that there are the properties East Barn and West Barn to the north. The next photograph is sort of panning round so you can appreciate really the sort of overgrown area to the rear, but also appreciating that there is quite a lot of landscaping here, and as you'll have noted in the report, no landscaping is proposed for removal as part of this proposal. And there would also be a condition relating to tree protection to be agreed prior to any works commencing. And this is really essentially the location of plot 2. So it's a little bit further west than the western part of the abattoir building at the moment. So the next photograph is just sort of panning round from that same view, but looking a little bit further south. And beyond these trees on the left-hand side is where the amenity space would be for plot 1, which is the more southerly of the two plots. The next photograph is actually taken from the garden of East Barn, and you do sort of appreciate at that point that there is a levels difference within the site. And you can see there is already some shadowing on the rear elevation of East Barn at that point. The next photograph is taken from, this was actually taken last November during the construction of a single-storey rear extension at East Barn. And you can see there are some fence posts just in the middle of the site, and that will help to delineate the amenity space between East Barn and West Barn at that point. And you can see the abattoir buildings just in the background. As I've noted in the report, from the rear point of this single-storey rear extension to the nearest part of the proposed plot 2, which is the one that is closest, this would actually be approximately 29.8 metres distance, which is quite a significant distance. The next photograph is taken from the garden space of West Barn, and it's sort of panning towards the site and appreciating as well some of the landscaping that will be retained. The next photograph is taken actually looking towards the rear western landscaping to the entire site at that point. So it is quite well established, and this is from the paddock land to the west of the site. And the next photograph is taken from that same paddock but from a more southerly position, so you're looking down to the western landscaping at that point. The next photograph, now this is taken looking towards the paddock where the third building has been omitted, and the next photograph is actually a better kind of orientation of where plot 1 would be located, so in the longer linear paddock to the south of the kind of former abattoir buildings. And the next photograph, now this is actually looking at where the linear rear amenity space of plot 1 would be located, but from that western boundary again. And the next photograph is looking along the southern boundary of the entire site, from the paddock that's just adjoining that to the south. And I think this may be my final photograph. This is just a kind of view taken further south, so looking down towards the application site at more of a distant view. Thanks, Haley. I think that was the last one. So if we could just go back to the aerial map, please. So as noted in the report, plot 2 fully, in our view, accords with the radial plan, local plan strategy, but due to its position, the majority of plot 1 would fall outside the development limits. However, it is considered that there are exceptional circumstances which allow officers to support this element. It's considered that the application as a whole, which would achieve the removal of a redundant abattoir from a central village location, has a wider heritage benefit in terms of the character of the conservation area. So it's considered that on balance, the approval of a dwelling in land which directly abuts the development limits is acceptable in these quite unique site-specific circumstances. In our view, this would not set any precedent, as each application is considered on its own individual merits, and this has been carefully considered. And this would only be approvable on the basis that local needs occupancy condition is applied to both dwellings, and the agent has agreed to this condition. Furthermore, it is acknowledged that the buildings are intended to house estate staff, and the point is raised about the limited level of available 3-bedroom properties in the locality, which has been acknowledged. It is considered that this will also help to support the land-based economy. It's noted that the removal of the third property, which was proposed in the paddock that we've just pointed out, would actually have fallen inside development limits itself, but the omission of this third property was agreed following an objection from the building conservation officer who had concerns about its development. It's considered that in terms of character and form, these relate to high quality designs and subject to the identified conditions, which include material samples, the submission of existing and proposed levels, tree protection methodology, landscaping, lighting and hard surfacing conditions. As noted, there's no objection from either the building conservation officer nor the AONB manager on this revised scheme. In terms of amenity, there remain planning concerns raised by the 2 neighbouring occupiers from East Barn and West Barn. And whilst these objections are noted, it's considered following careful review that the proposal is acceptable in planning terms. There is a substantial distance between these properties, and the proposed plot 2 would be well in excess of normal back-to-back distances, although in this instance it wouldn't be a direct back-to-back arrangement, which would again help to prevent direct instances of overlooking. The nearest part of the dwelling at plot 2 would be approximately 29.8 metres from the nearest part of the recently constructed rear extension at East Barn, which is the closer of those 2 neighbouring properties. It is noted in the report, and as you've been able to see from the photos, that land levels are higher on the application site, and it's acknowledged that some shadowing may occur, particularly when the sun is low in the sky during the winter time. But given the distances, it's not considered that this is likely to be materially harmful. It was also noted that during the site visit undertaken at East Barn and West Barn in November 2020 that it appeared that the garden of East Barn was already in some shadow from the existing boundary treatment to the site, as well as partially the rear of that dwelling. A condition has been recommended in relation to boundary treatments to get a sort of sensitive and appropriate level to not sort of enhance instances of overshadowing. Additionally, we have recommended the removal of permitted development rights at the site, which is considered appropriate in this conservation area location. But beyond that, we have specifically removed rights to install first floor windows in the northern elevation of Plot 2 to prevent impacts on privacy. Furthermore, a planting scheme will be sought as part of the aforementioned landscaping condition that can help to soften the appearance of the development from neighbouring properties. North Yorkshire County Council Highways, North Yorkshire County Council Ecology and Environmental Health have no objection to the proposal with appropriate conditions raised. So therefore, to conclude, it is considered that the existing redundant and poor quality abattoir buildings do not make a positive contribution to the character and appearance of the village conservation area, and it is highly unlikely that they would be brought back into use. The principle of residential development subject to the imposition of the local needs occupancy condition and other relevant conditions has been carefully considered. It's noted that Plot 2 accords wholly with Policy SP2 in terms of the redevelopment of previously developed land. And on balance, due to the wider benefits, the proposed development of Plot 1 as part of this wider scheme can also receive officer support due to the wider public benefits. It's considered that these benefits outweigh the partial conflict with the development plan which has arisen. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Niamh. There is an objector in this case, Mr. Dan Bulmer. Are you there, Mr. Bulmer?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Right, well, can you make your presentation, please? You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, yeah. To be honest, it's not, I don't have a massive objection to the site as a whole. I mean, I work in the construction industry and I'm all for building development and everything else that comes with it. But no, following on from what Niamh said, I have quite a big concern with the different levels of land and the site being a lot higher, and with that Plot 2 being as high, double-storey property, it really will feel quite imposing on us. I know Niamh mentioned that the 29 metres away from the two properties. From the site and our neighbours East Barn, but I think you really need to come and see the site to realise a two-storey property where the existing building is now really will have a significant impact on the shadowing that has been mentioned, and I know it's been taken into consideration about the privacy with the windows not being in the gable end elevation of that plot, but also, as I can gather from the plans that I've seen briefly, the actual positioning of the plot will show that the one of the main elevations will be looking right the way across our garden. So I do feel privacy is still an issue to a certain extent. So have a look what else I wanted to say about the matter. I do think also I feel. Let me have a look. If it was taken into consideration that for example the property of Plot 2 at the top of the site was for example, a bungalow that didn't exceed the roof height of the existing abattoir property, it would obviously solve the issues I've raised with the levels and the heights and everything else. So whether that could be considered, I'm not sure, but I do have a strong feeling about that and the impact it's going to have being 2-storey. But as I say, I'm not objecting to the
You have
planning as a
15
whole.
seconds left.
But that's my main concern really. And I would like, if possible, a site visit, so you could totally see the impact that it's going to have. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, do members have any questions?
We've got another speaker, Chairman.
I beg your pardon. Mr. Kim Eastwood. Are you there, Mr. Eastwood?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and members. We've worked hard alongside officers to evolve the scheme into something which is considered acceptable and indeed supported with a recommendation of approval. The majority of the site falls within the development limits and is situated on a redundant abattoir site. The development of the site is considered to have a wider heritage benefit to the character of the conservation area. The scheme is for 2 3-bedroom properties to accommodate workers of the Nunnington estate, the specific need for which has been confirmed and agreed with the council. Such will help support the local land-based economy. I'll come back to concerns in a moment if that's okay. The scheme presents a positive opportunity to remove existing and poor quality abattoir buildings, which have a detrimental impact upon the character and appearance of the conservation area. The proposed dwellings are modest 3-bedroom properties to meet an identified need for local estate workers, and we are totally in agreement in terms of the subject to the local needs occupancy condition. Obviously, we've had discussions with Neves about separation distances from the occupiers of both West Barn and East Barn, and I totally appreciate there's quite a big difference in land levels. Plot 2, however, from the submitted plans you will see, there's a gable end that faces onto East Barn, and in terms of the assessment on separation distances, it was considered that the separation distances will exceed the required minimum distance. Appreciate the separation, the land levels change that requirement as such, but in our opinion it still exceeds those minimum distances. Thank you.
Thank you. Do members have any questions? Councillor Mason.
Do we know the difference in height?
Neve?
Thank you. I don't believe we have the precise levels. If we go back to the site visit photographs, there were photographs taken from the properties of East Barn and West Barn that give quite good context. As part of the recommended conditions, there is a condition recommended for existing and for proposed site levels to be submitted to ensure that, within the site itself, the building isn't raised up even further than is proposed. But the other thing that I would say is that I have mentioned the separation distance of 29.3 metres between the nearest part of the nearest property, which is East Barn, and the generally accepted sort of back-to-back distances are in and around sort of 22 metres, would you say?
Well, I think, genuine back-to-back is normally taken as an industry standard of 20 to 22, but that's back-to-back. This is side-to-back. Okay. If you look at page 93, and then look at the detail of the drawing for that plot, which is on page 97, you'll see that what's facing, well, there isn't anything facing, it's a side gable, a relatively narrow gable, to be blunt. Yes, these are detached buildings, but they're fairly modest 3-bed detached buildings. That side gable, if you then go back to page 93, is the one that's facing northwards, I'll say towards East and West Barn. Its orientation is actually east-west. And even in that west elevation, when you look at the rear elevation, 2 of the 3 windows are actually either a bathroom or an ensuite bathroom. So they're not, what I would call habitable rooms in that sense, and are aspected through 90 degrees at a distance of around 30 metres. So yes, there is a difference in levels, and you sort of get a feel for that on page 94 when you look at the front cottage, and then the site raises up from from there at that part of Rectory Lane, which itself then reduces as you go further north down the road. So there is a change in levels. As people who are familiar with that part of Nunnington will appreciate, you're on a hillside, so there just is the way that the character of the development is. So really, for us, we don't think there is anything remotely like a significant amenity issue with this. For us, the issue that we brought before you tonight is that one of these dwellings is partly outside the development limits. That's the issue for us. And that's then balanced against the fact that we've got a site within a conservation area, a site that's already had a permission, but I would suggest was a scheme contrived to fit on the site of the buildings, which didn't actually work that well. This site, this scheme, which you'll have heard from Neve, originally started as 3 dwellings, which actually had a 3rd dwelling within the development limits, but was occupying quite a nice open space within the village. That's been deleted, and we've now got a scheme that I think, in our terms, relates better to the form and character of that part of the settlement and is largely within the development limit and enhances the conservation area. So, in the overall balance, whilst I couldn't say there isn't an amenity impact, because clearly both of those neighbours would see a gable in the site where the abattoir is, that with the revisions to the design and the quite stringent conditions which you'll have seen, particularly the likes of the PD removal and condition 12 about no additional windows in that gable at some future point, that we've got a scheme that we're happy to recommend. So it's one of those that you weigh up the pros and cons, and clearly there are a lot more pros than cons from our point of view.
Any more questions? No, I think this is one of Councillor Thackeray's area, in Councillor Thackeray's area, but Councillor Thackeray isn't here. So is there anybody who would like to start the discussion? Councillor Windress.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It used to be my patch a few years back. I can't really see any issues with this one. The 29 metres distance, I know the land falls away, but that amenity has got to be a lot better than when the abattoir was in working. I know it hasn't worked for 6-7 years, well 5 years actually, but I think this is a good scheme for the area, and I'll move officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Windress. Councillor Potter.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a bit of a shame to lose another local abattoir, even though this one's long gone. And I wonder how few mega slaughterhouses we could manage with countrywide with all the associated transport miles for the animals, but I digress, of course. This application appears to be an excellent example of sensible negotiation between the developer and the planning authority, and more particularly a credit to the officer. And it's really refreshing to see an effective use of the local needs occupancy clause, providing for a recognised need by local people in one of our smaller villages. So consequently, I thoroughly approve, and I'm happy to second it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. Does anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll echo what Councillor Potter says. It seems to be an excellently thought out scheme, and surely residential property is preferable to a sadly disused and run down abattoir buildings.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? In that case, we will, it's been proposed and seconded for approval. In that case, we'll go ahead to the vote. Please, Gary.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the vote for the officer recommendation of conditional approval. Councillor Andrews?
For.
Councillor Cleary?
For.
Councillor Goodrich?
For.
Councillor Mason?
For.
Councillor Mackenzie?
For.
Councillor Potter?
For.
Councillor Windress?
For.
That's unanimous, Chairman. 7 votes for conditional approval.
Thank you, Gary. We now go on to the final item on the agenda, which is at Sandreave Cottage, 39 Middle Cave Road, Malton. It's variation of condition 02 and 03 on approval 20-00920 house dated 17th March 2021 to accept an additional window at ground floor to the west elevation and variation of details approved for condition 03 on 21-00570 COND dated 26 April 2021 to accept side hung casement to one number window in the north elevation at first floor level. Is this yours, Neve, as well?
No, Chairman, it's Ellie Thompson who's patiently waited online.
Hello, Ellie. Would you like to make your presentation?
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just check that you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Some members will remember this site from a previous application which was determined in March this year for extending and remodelling a cottage off Middle Cave Road in Malton. This current application seeks to vary two conditions on the previous planning permission to allow for an additional relocated ground floor window in the side elevation of the property and to allow for one first floor northern window to be side hung with a restrictor bar rather than being top hung. It is understood that during the construction process, the applicant was advised by building control that the eastern first floor window in the northern elevation of the property needed to be a means of escape window, which is why a side hung window has subsequently been installed. The window does feature a restrictor bar, which restricts the extent to which the window can be opened when not in use during an emergency. When fully open with the restrictor bar in place, the opening of the window is directed towards the east and measures approximately 8 centimetres. Members will note from the report that we have received an objection to the application, which raised the issue of why an escape window needs to be side hung when it could be self-supporting top hung window and therefore comply with the original condition. Technically, a top-hung self-supporting window could have been installed in this opening and complied with the previous planning condition. However, a self-supporting top-hung window would be able to be opened to a full extent, which would allow for uninterrupted views of the neighbouring properties to the north, which would not be in the interests of the occupiers of these dwellings. Members, I would just say I have been inside this property and I have opened the window that has been installed to its full extent with the restrictor in place, and you cannot see any neighbouring properties from this window. On this basis, the side hung window is considered to be acceptable, subject to the additional wording to the condition outlined in the officer's report. So I'll just take you through the photos. If we go to the first photo, please. Thank you. So for the benefit of those members who are unfamiliar with the site, this is where it's positioned. It's situated off Middle Cave Road, which is to the east there, immediately to the immediately to the east of Malton Hospital car park just there. If we could go to the next picture, please. Thank you. So this is the new front northern elevation of the property. The new ground floor window is situated on the western side elevation down the left-hand side of the property as you would view it from this position. And the first floor window, which is the subject of the application, is the window above the garage there on the left-hand side. Next, thank you. So this photo shows the window in its proximity to the eastern boundary of the site. In terms of construction, when viewed from this position, it's the right-hand casement which must be opened first and which features the restrictor bar. As you can see from the angle of the window within the site, when opened, the opening of the window would be directed towards the east, so towards those trees. Away from the neighbouring properties, which are sort of behind us as we look from this position in this photo. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this photo has been taken from inside the property, which shows the obscure glazing and the full extent to which the window can be opened with the fixer bar in place. So that's the full size of the opening when that casement's been opened. This image shows when both of the casements have been opened. So from this perspective, the right-hand casement features a central mullion, which overlaps slightly over the left-hand side casement. So it can't open past the left-hand casement, which features the restrictor bar. So in effect, they're both restricted by the same bar on the left-hand side there. So this is a close-up of the size of the opening and the fixer bar, which is just to the left of the tape measure, the bit that's sort of sticking up at an angle there. And then this, just for completeness, this image shows the relocated ground floor window on the side of the property. Apologies, it's not the best photo. It's quite a tight side access down there, but hopefully it conveys the positioning of the window and its outlook towards what is just a boundary fence. I think that's my last photo. Thank you, Chairman. There are no more updates to the report, and the recommendation is as outlined.
Thank you, Ellie. We have an objector who wishes to speak, Mr. David Barnett. Mr. Barnett, are you there, please?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Could you make your presentation, please? You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. As Ellie said, back on the 17th of March, we looked through the original application and we were at pains to put in safeguards for local properties being overlooked by Sandreath Cottage. We did create a decision notice to protect the privacy of the neighbouring properties and to comply with policy SP20 of the Rydale Plan. And key to that was condition 3, stated that all north-facing first floor windows must be obscured glazed and top hung or fixed. And as you can see from the pictures now, the property has been developed, and its overbearing nature that we talked about in that original meeting is now become manifest. And what pictures we didn't see was how close to the fence actually that front of the house is. So now we're faced with wanting a change to one of the windows, as Ellie said, to put in an escape window. So building regulations say that an escape window must be at least have a height and width of 450 millimetres, which this window does, and be openable to an area of 0.33 metres square. And as Ellie has pointed out, that can be done through a side opening window or a top opening window. So what's been put in a while ago now actually is a side opening window with a restrictor bar. My fear is that restrictor bar can be overridden very easily by the press of a button on the window, and also that restrictor bar could actually be removed in the future, and it would leave just a side opening window, when we were at pains to actually go through and say those windows that are facing the north elevation should all be top opening windows. So it does open up to that very real possibility. And what we didn't see there was a picture of maybe the window fully opened and just the view that would expose across my garden and neighbouring gardens, and takes away the privacy that the decision notice that we put in place tries to protect. So I think that everything the developer needs to do, as in put in an escape window, could be done in line with the original decision notice. And that's really my point. There's no reason, I don't think, to actually change the original decision notice in this case, in respect of the north-facing first floor windows. I would say I don't have any objection to the west windows that have been put in. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now come to questions, and as it's my ward, I'll ask the first question, I think. Am I correct, Ali, that the building the building regulation authority are saying that the top hung window is not satisfactory from the point of view of the building regulations, or is it, as Mr. Barnett says, that either way, either top hung or side hung, is satisfactory, will satisfy the building regulations? I've got another question after that.
Thank you, Chairman. Building regs only requested that that window needs to be a means of escape window. They did state that a top-hung window as an escape route would be unusual. And, you know, it's up to the applicant to sort of carry out the advice of the building control advisor. As I try to sort of outline in my sort of introduction, as far as I'm aware, top-hung escape windows can be installed, but they have to be self-supporting. So effectively, they have to open and stay open by themselves. So while a top-hung escape window could be installed and comply with that original condition, because it has to support itself, it could be opened all the way so it's effectively 90 degrees and gives a full view in front of the dwelling, and that so that wouldn't protect the amenity of the properties opposite. Whilst this window is the one that's been installed is side hung, it is restricted, and it does we do think it does protect the amenity of the properties opposite.
So my second question is Mr. Barnett right in the sense that that the restrictor bar can be moved quite easily, and if that is correct, are you satisfied that the condition will that you've imposed in the recommendation will be sufficient to prevent a capricious occupier from opening that window by pressing the button to release the restrictor bar in a way which is not intended by the actual report that you've presented?
Thank you, Chairman. The restrictor bar, it's not quite as simple as a push of a button. It is quite secure. It's hard to explain, but you have to. It's quite fiddly in order to undo it. It would take a minute or two. It's not quite as simple as either a button or a sort of hook and eye to then open the window. We have in the condition we have included wording to say that fixer bar needs to be retained for the lifetime of the development unless that window is in use as an emergency exit. So I think we're satisfied that covers that.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Councillor Goodrick.
Thank you, Chairman. Ellie, am I right in thinking that this window is in the bathroom, an upstairs bathroom?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah,
okay.
It's then onto the bedroom.
And it still remains obscure glazed?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Ellie.
Any other questions? Well, in that case, I will move into the debate, and it is my ward. I have to say I'm a little bit concerned about this because we did have a long discussion about this originally, and the conclusion we all came to after a long debate was that the development, which was quite extensive and doubled the size of this building, would be okay. We thought if there was a restriction on the windows, and what do we find now is that the building has been built, and but the windows haven't been put in the way in which we actually asked them to be put in. So I'm not at all pleased with this. I think that if this matter had been dealt with properly, and there was a problem with building regulations, then the applicant should have come back to the council before he decided to take the law into his own hands and build it the way he thought it should be built. Nevertheless, I do accept the officer's report, and reluctantly, I will propose the officer's report. the officer's recommendation. Does anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Goodrick.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm trying to take a balanced view of this, and I'm looking at it's a bathroom window, it's obscure glazed, it is a restricted opening. I can't imagine why anybody would want to stand in a bathroom and look out across somebody else's garden, frankly. So I think there's a bit of balance to be brought to this. And at the end of the day, building control says that we have to have an escape route, and this is it. I don't have a problem with this, I really don't. I think it's a minor amendment, and I'll second it. Thank you, Chairman.
Would anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it seems that the side opener is less intrusive than the top opener, as the top opener has been stated would give a far greater view. So I will be supporting this.
Anybody else? In that case, can we have the vote?
Thank you, Chairman. This is a vote for officer conditional approval. Councillor Andrews?
For, Chair. For, rather.
Councillor Cleary?
For.
Councillor Goodrick?
For.
Councillor Mason?
For.
Councillor Mackenzie?
For.
Councillor Potter?
For.
Councillor Windris?
For.
That's unanimously approved, 7 votes for approval, Chairman.
Thank you, Gary. Now, any other business of the one item of any other business, of course, is the date of the site visit. And there are 2 properties that we wish to see. I haven't got my diary with me, but you were suggesting the
Yeah, I mean,
10th.
obviously we've got I think the office returns to work after, so I'm told, returns to work after the new year.
If you're allowed.
Yes, that's right. But looking at diaries, it looks to me as though the more obvious week is probably a date, the week commencing the 10th of January. That's Monday the 10th. So ordinarily we usually have meetings of a Tuesday halfway between meetings, but I think that won't work because of Christmas. So in that sense, we're not really necessarily tied to a day that week, but Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th. I'm not sure how diary is.
Can we do the 11th? Can everybody else do the 11th? The 11th at 10 o'clock then, Gary?
Yes, Chairman. I mean, clearly we've got the basement, as it's described, at the Corn Mill at Railway Street, Malton, and then also the site at West Lilling. So probably would suggest starting at the Malton inspection, because I think that probably will be done fairly quickly. Obviously, we can only do external inspections anyway, and then head off to West Lilling. So if we start at 10, we'll work on a time for the second one, but I guess it'll be around about 11, I guess, somewhere around that.
No, there's no problem with that, is there, Gary?
So you want to start at 9:30?
10:30.
10:30 at the So yeah, if we start the first one at 10:30, I don't think there'll be an issue. Yeah.
Is that agreed, everybody? Right? Or well, that sorts that one out.
It's on the 11th, Chairman.
11th January. The next item is the list of applications determined under delegated powers. Are there any comments on any of those? And I don't think there are any appeals this week, are there?
No new ones, Chairman. I think they're a bit like buses from the planning inspectorate. You don't get any, and then you get 3 all at once. But, none this month.
Councillor Cleary.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just on the subject of appeals, have we had any appeals received but not yet dealt with on applications that we've refused?
I difficult off the top of my head. I've been asked whether the BATA have appealed. As far as we know, there's been no appeal on that refusal. I think we have a current appeal in on the silo barn conversion at Swinton on the barn complex there, but that's sort of only recently sort of started going. Oh yes, the storage container at Pickering, the unusual storage container. Yeah.
If there are no more questions, I will close the meeting. The meeting is closed.